All right, so this is where I think I ran into trouble. Was I basically misinterpreted my grandpa's teachings? So my grandpa's teaching me. He says, I ask him, is white supremacy the flow? Because I said, it seems like there's an agenda to destroy the white race. My grandpa says, no, white supremacy isn't the flow. Because if you believe you're white, then you still believe that you're a separate body, So, as opposed to the flow, now I know what the flow is when you transcend the body and you are in pure awareness, because the body and its limitations, the senses, first off, the senses, my grandpa would say, they don't show you reality, So the flow is the transcendence of the body, the self. But at the time, I didn't understand that. My grandpa would say the flow is transcendence of even experience because your senses don't, but I didn't understand at the time. So I'm thinking, okay, so white supremacy isn't the flow, even though my grandpa would say, like, yes, sometimes concessions like the KKK and stuff, but they're concessions because black people were raping white women. But my point is, I didn't understand. I was thinking, okay, transcend the ego, transcend the self. That means we should be for race mixing. I thought the flow was just basically race mixing, anti-racist. Be an anti-racist and be for race mixing. That's what I thought the flow was, because my grandpa's like, there is no self. And so I'm like, okay, so let's transcend white supremacy and then and be for race mixing. Then we're in the flow. Because my grandpa, he said something like, if you're in the flow, or he would say, Jesus says, or in the Bible, I think Paul says, there in Christ there is no Jew nor Greek, male nor female, slave nor free, right? My grandpa would say that means in the flow you transcend the self. So you're not identifying as a Jew or Greek, but you transcend the self. But now I know that's to get pure awareness, but I didn't understand at the time. So I'm thinking that the flow is some race mixing thing. So I'm thinking the flow is like, okay, yeah, transcend white supremacy and be for race mixing. So I'm like, yeah. So then like I said, around 2020, I'm making all these podcasts, and I think that I'm following my grandpa's teachings because I'm like, yeah, there is no such thing as white and black. Those are just social constructions. I listened to this Jewish woman who made an audiobook on something, and she was talking about why is it that white, when a black person has a child with a white person, the child's still considered black and it's not considered white. That's because race is a social construction, and there is the difference between there can be more distinction between a black person and another black person and a white person and another white person. So why are they considered separate races? Well, so I was thinking I was thinking because I adopted all these liberal leftist ideas of race being a social construction, and even homosexuality. Homosexuality is a social construction because the samurai used to be homosexuals, but they didn't call themselves homosexuals because it was seen as normal to have sex between men and men. And these are all the social constructions. In ancient Italy, it was normal. Michelangelo was probably homosexual, but he didn't call himself a homosexual because that was just normal back then. So there's no such thing. Transcend the ego. I thought I was transcending the ego by being like, it's all social construction. There's no such thing as gay or straight or man and woman. That's just a social construction because there's women who have more estrogen, and there's men who have more estrogen, and there's women who have more testosterone, and men who have more testosterone, and sex is a continuum. And so I'm thinking that I'm in the flow because I'm adopting all these liberal ideas, but really in the back of my mind, I saw myself as Jewish and I wanted to destroy society, and I didn't really necessarily believe it. I was just like, yeah, it's terrible that people, there's women who are, to say that women can't be firefighters, that's ridiculous because there's some men who are very strong, and there's some women who are very, very strong, but there's also some men who are very weak, and there's some women who are very strong. So to say that women can't be firefighters when there's some men who are weaker than some women, that's just ridiculous. But really, I wanted to destroy and degrade society and just subvert everything and be like, there's no such thing as black and white. It's all due to environment. And, but my grandpa confused me because my grandpa would be like, I asked my grandpa, what do you think is the main difference between, why is it that more black people, play basketball or and stuff? And my grandpa would be like, well, a lot of it might just be the environment, but we don't know. If you're in the flow, you don't know. But my point is my grandpa didn't blame genes. And I think the reason why my grandpa wouldn't blame genes for a lot of stuff is because it's existentially invalid. I remember I asked my grandpa one time, I was like, why is it, if it's not Darwinism, then why is it that a lot of times parents who have foster children, they put them on psychiatric medications and they don't treat them as well. And my grandpa was like, it's because I wanted to say it's because of Darwinism. It's natural, it's because the lion doesn't treat his own cubs well because it's not his same genes. So I wanted to justify primitive behaviors or predatory behaviors and be like, yeah, it's natural that a foster parent treats his foster children bad because it's Darwinism. And I want to think it was instinctual. But my grandpa would say if an existentially valid way of looking at things is to transcend Darwinian way of looking at things. Because if you see things as separate selves and genes and stuff, then you're going to justify. And I found this out the hard way. Then you justify where I tried to have a baby out of wedlock because I wanted to be superior. And so I could spread my genes more because that's the way that I looked at reality. And it was existentially invalid. And it led to, problems. Whereas if my grandpa would say, if you see everything as energy and the self as an illusion and work to transcend the self through rituals and stuff like that to the flow, then you're not going to, then that's a more existentially valid, responsible way of looking at things. And it's going to lead to better results. And as opposed to seeing yourself as a Darwinian animal, So I wanted to be like, yeah, that's why the foster parent does it. But my grandpa would say, no, it's more due to software. My grandpa would say maybe a lot of foster parents, maybe people who choose to be foster parents, a lot of them are immature, maybe because they become foster parents so they can show off, and they're still stuck in the ego. And, I don't know exactly how he would explain it, but maybe because, they do view things in a Darwinian lens, and they do think, that's not really my biological children, so I don't want to take care of them that well, as opposed to seeing everything as one. And, who knows? There's a lot of reasons why they would put foster children on psychiatric medications more. And, maybe a lot of people who become foster parents are just predatory to begin with, and they use that as a justification. But my point is, now I understand why my grandpa was trying to move me away from the Darwinian lens. And the reason why the reason why I was so into the Darwinian lens is because I was anti-white and I was anti-religious. And I wanted to see, religion is just an epiphenomena of Darwinism. And I didn't want to, because I saw religion as white supremacist, and I wanted to destroy religion. So, anyways, so I didn't see things through the spiritual lens, but I saw things more through the materialistic Freudian Darwinian lens, and that leads to problems, and it led to problems. But my point is, my grandpa's telling me about the flow, and he's saying like, yeah, transcend the self. But I'm thinking transcend the self, transcend the ego. Okay, that's race mixing. Listen, I transcended the ego. I'm not a white supremacist. I transcended the ego. But that was still the ego. I still saw myself as Jewish. I still wanted race mixing. I wanted to destroy the white race. And it's like, so I didn't transcend the ego because I was for race mixing, but I thought that I did, But so my point is, I was confused, and then I made a lot of podcasts at that time, and in my podcast I was talking about how race is a social construction, and sexuality is a social construction, and gender is a social construction, and everybody, all that matters, because my grandpa confused me. My grandpa talked about all that matters is work hard, just go all out, and now I understand that. So okay, so this is one thing that my grandpa taught me, was he said that there's this law in the Old Testament where it says don't mix wool with linen. Now, when I was a Marxist, I was like, yeah, don't mix wool with linen. That's a metaphor, because this is what Josephus even said. He said that's a metaphor of the wool is the nomadic sheep herders, and the linen is the agriculturalists. And as a Marxist, I want to see everything through the Marxist lens. I'm like, yeah, and the Jews, because it even says in the story of Exodus that the Egyptians were agriculturalists and the Jews were nomads, and they mixed, right? And that led to problems, right? So, but in my mind, I'm like, yeah, the agriculturalists, those are the evil white people, the evil Egyptians who are actually white, and the nomads, those are the brown, those are the people of color. That's the Jews. But I didn't want to see, I want to see the Jews as more black, more not black, but more ethnic, because I saw Jews as more brown, right? So I'm like, yeah, and the Jews, that's the nomads, and don't they, and the Bible's about the how it's the nomads are evil, and I mean not the nomads, the agriculturists are evil. So white people, and the victims, they're the good guys, and and that's what that law is about. It's about the Jews should revolt against the agriculturalists, and that's why I want to see everything, right? But as I said, my grandpa told me, the story of Cain and Abel is, yeah, it's about the agricultural revolution, but Cain isn't necessarily the bad guy. Cain says, am I my brother's keeper? And the fact of the matter is, you're not your brother's keeper. You're your brother's brother, and Cain had no obligation to take care of Abel. And that's like the anti-welfare way of looking at things, but it's probably true. It's the idea that if someone's a parasite and they're taking advantage of you, are you supposed to just like lay down and be like, yeah, it's that like don't tread on me sign, and that seems like right wing, and it seems like callous and stuff, but at the same time, there's some validity to it, and I know that for a fact with me, because I was a parasite. I was anti-white parasite, and I saw myself as Jewish, and I was against the white people, so I have some understanding about that, but I want to see it that way. But my grandpa said the thing about don't mix wool with linen is don't try to be equal. Don't be a Marxist. Don't be a communist. Don't try to be equal. Instead of trying to be equal, because if you're trying to be equal, my grandpa says trying to be superior, trying to be inferior, and trying to be equal, that's superior, inferior, equal software. My grandpa says superior, inferior, equal, you still believe that you're a separate self. You're still trying to promote and preserve the separate self, but you're just trying to be equal with other selves. But my grandpa says there is no self. And if you're in the flow, you just work to excel, and you go all out. Okay? And you just, expand your awareness and inquiry, and then so you could be receptive to the truth. And you transcend the body which is contaminated. Because the body is based around experience, but experiences are based around the senses, and the senses don't see reality. So anyways, my grandpa's saying, don't try to be equal. That's what that's about. Don't mix wool with linen. Don't try to be equal. Don't be like the agriculturalists and the nomads are equal. Don't try to be equal, but try to transcend the self. Because if you're trying to be equal, you still believe you're a separate self. And that's also like the story of Lilith, where Lilith wants to be equal to Adam, and she goes on top of Adam. My grandpa would be like, yeah, that's a lot of people say that's what feminism is, women trying to be equal. And, that's not, my grandpa would say that's not existentially valid, because that's still based around the illusion that there's a separate self. But there is no self. And instead of trying to be equal and trying to fight the power, that's why my grandpa says activism doesn't help, because the women are trying to fight against the men. They still think they're women, and they're fighting against men. But my grandpa would say, no. If you really want to, rather than try to fight and be an activist, my grandpa would say, Sojourner Truth. She didn't fight the slave system. She just seek the truth. You don't have to try to fight, and you don't have to just go all out and just do it, inquiry and expanding your awareness, and you don't have to fight and try to be equal, and because that's based around the illusion that you're a separate self. I guess my grandpa would say it could be a concession to a work in progress and process, but anyways. But, but I misutilized my grandpa's teaching. So I'm like, yeah, it doesn't matter if you're black or white. Just go all out and just work hard. Just work hard and go all out, because black and white's a social construction, and really the differences are because of environment. And if we just go all out. But I just wanted to promote race mixing, and I wanted to destroy the white race. And like I said, my grandpa would teach me that, welfare, or, giving to the poor doesn't necessarily help the poor. But I still didn't want to believe that, because I wanted to give to the poor, because I was like, yeah, you're just a white supremacist, Grandpa. We should give to the black people and to the Latin Americans and stuff. And I'm thinking, like, why don't you get it, Grandpa? You haven't transcended your ego. You're still a white supremacist. I've transcended my ego. I'm not a white supremacist, but really, I just was Jewish. I just saw myself as Jewish, and I wanted to destroy the white race. But I'm thinking, I've transcended the ego. I'm so righteous. I'm so virtuous. I want to give to the poor. Really, I just wanted the white people to give away their resources and let the people of color overtake them. So but yeah, like I said, so during this time, okay, but also during this time is when I was studying a lot of Hinduism, and I hadn't really connected all the dots yet. But again, I didn't understand the flow, and so I'm thinking that the flow in transcending the ego is race mixing, right? So I'm studying the Hindu mythology, but I'm doing it under my grandpa's lens. So I'll kind of give a little gist of my interpretations of Hindu mythology. So I did a lot of research. I was watching a lot of serials, Hindu serials, like basically movies that show the Hindu myths. And like one thing I discovered was like Arjuna, he's the son of the god of storms, and Karna, he's the son of the god of the sun. And Arjuna is on the side of Vishnu, preservation, and Karna is on the side of Shiva, destruction. So and so what this represents is the storm god is preservation, and the sun god is destruction. And they fight each other, and that's the sun versus the clouds, the sun versus storms. So I'm studying this stuff, and I'm like, okay, and I start to realize I make this idea. I'm like, whoa, why is the storm god on the side of preservation? And I thought, okay, maybe because the clouds cover the sun, and the sun represents time, and the sun is a physical object. But the clouds obscure the physicality, obscure the illusion, because the sun gives appearance to reality. But the clouds obscure appearance, because appearance is not reality. And the sun also brings about time. And physicality brings about the illusion of time. And that's why Shiva is also on the side of Kali, the goddess of time and physicality. And usually the goddesses are more material based. Like there's the earth goddess, and they're more material. And the sun god is on the side of Shiva and destruction, and on the side of Kali, the goddess, because in the Mahabharata, the Kali, the goddess, is on the side of Karna, the son of the sun god. And this is, I think it was Duryodhana is a representation. He's the avatar of Kali. And he's against the storm god, Arjuna, and the god of preservation. I'm like, okay, so what this represents is the cloud obscures the sun, obscures illusion of separate things. And it's also an illusion. This whole story is a metaphor of the flow. Because I was like, my grandpa says that the flow is transcendence of the ego and transcendence of time. So I was like, okay, well, the clouds covering the sun represents time. The sun is the marker of time. And also you see all these other gods who represent time on that side, including the Ganges River, the Ganges River avatar is on the side of Duryodhana, but he's on the side of the sun god of Shiva, destruction, but at the same time he's really on the side of Vishnu, preservation, but he has to fight with. But anyways, he's on the side of Shiva because the river goddess, the Ganges River, helps to clear people of their sins. So if you sin, you can go in the Ganges River and you can be cured, and that's the idea of like transcending the self, but it allows for sin. So the sun god always had the Ashwin twins, who are the gods of healing, and he's on the side of Shiva, destruction. So the storm god always hates the gods of healing and hates the sun god because he doesn't want healing. The storm god and Vishnu, preservation, don't want healing because sickness comes about through sin, and healing basically allows people to sin. And the storm god, preservation, doesn't want sin. So I'm like, okay, so this is about the flow, because so the Ganges River, the son of the Ganges River is Bhima or Bhishma, and he's on the side of Karna, the sun god. And so he's on the side of sin, and sin comes about through the illusion of physicality, and that's what the sun represents. He's very physical. And then also the other avatars of the different planets are on the side of the sun god. And so what the storm god covering them represents, Arjuna and Vishnu, it represents the destruction of the illusion of separate objects and of time, because the sun and the planets create time. So this is Arjuna killing them represents the flow. It's the destruction of time, the illusion of time, because my grandpa told me that the flow is the transcendence of the ego and transcendence of time. When you're in the flow, you're in the eternal moment. So I was like, okay, so that's what this story is a representation of. But at the same time, remember, I didn't understand what the flow was, though. So I'm like, okay, yeah, the flow is transcendence of the ego and transcendence of time. Woo! But at the same time, I'm a fucking idiot. And I was like, yeah, I've transcended the ego. I'm for race mixing. That's what the transcendence of ego is. The flow is for race mixing. And I was trying to promote race mixing, but I didn't realize that was still the ego. I thought I was in the flow, but I wasn't. So I'll continue.